Hello and welcome to Bust and Beyond with your host, Robin Hayhurst. In this podcast, Robin will share his personal journey and experiences from his businesses and help you to learn from failure. You'll learn tips, tricks, and how to see things from a new perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robin Hayhurst.
Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Bust and Beyond with Bill Lewis, who is a board coach and mentor. Hello Bill, and thanks for joining us today.
Robin, thank you. It's my pleasure. I think you're doing an amazing job in bringing these stories to people who are growing companies and assuring them that things in the future world is going to be okay.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Bill. So Bill, kind of getting into it, perhaps you can tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Bill Lewis, and I help people, executives and companies navigate new directions. Now, sometimes I also help them to avoid catastrophes.
Right, okay. So how did you get into business? So where did you start from?
Well, I think with that introduction, I must have some degree of credibility, and that credibility comes from the fact that I've been in both big corporate life and as an entrepreneur for quite some decades now. But where did I start? Well, in one of my speeches, I actually start off and say, well, look, I came from being a rural farm boy. I lived in a little village and there was 4 farms within about 50 to 100 meters. And that's where I spent my life. I'm helping around farms, working on farms, going to school, and then at 16, I left, went into the big world. My first job I didn't like, I left. I went on to a second job in the motor industry. It's fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had an amazing boss, and this emphasizes that if you're going to do things, if you're going to grow, you really need a terrific boss. You need somebody who's going to encourage you. And here am I at a tender young age with this guy, and I remember his name, Jerry Yates. Jerry was the epitome of the empowering manager. In those days, those terms weren't used, but he empowered you. He allowed you to take responsibility. He gave you accountability, and he just allowed people to grow. And that was terrific. I decided that I wanted to. I was with Leyland Motors at that time, way back when Leyland, the British Leyland, existed. And I decided I wanted to leave them. And I applied to Ford Motor Company. And they interviewed me and they said, well, your experience is terrific, but you haven't got any qualifications, have you? Which was absolutely correct. I had diddly squat. So that was kind of a motivation. Think, well, okay, if I want to get on somewhere, I guess I better get some qualification. Now, this story could go on for a long time, but I'll give you the short version. I managed to negotiate my way onto what was then an HND course, which was billed as equivalent to a first degree. Debatable. I got through that very successfully. I negotiated my way onto a master's course, although I didn't actually have the right qualifications. I came out of a master's course at Lancaster Business School with a distinction. And then I went off to the heady world of Ford. I went back and said, 4 years ago, you told me I was no good. So I'm back. And they said, wow, all right, okay, well, we'll give you a job. So I got quite a senior grade. I got a car. I got decent salary. And I got bored. I got incredibly bored. Now, Ford has a lot to go for it. And I don't knock the experience that I had. But it was a massive bureaucracy. I'm not suited to a bureaucracy. I don't fit. I'm that round peg and square hole. So I went off and I joined KPMG in the consultancy side, which was pretty cool because I ended up working with their fraud department. And we'd go into companies because banks got a bit suspicious of what was going on and try to find out how could we, well, first of all, what the hell was going on. And quite often there was money disappearing out in all directions and the bank's loans weren't secure and yada, yada, yada. But it gave us the opportunity to actually work out how could this business be turned around and can it be rescued and can it be sold? And that was a fantastic experience. So I actually did 4 of those as acting CEO, one of which was a little airline, which was an amazing experience out in the Caribbean. We closed an airline down and the the local British government representative said, well, if you close it down, what are we going to do? I said, well, we start another airline. And he said, well, that's all right, but who's going to run it? I said, well, I'll run it. Sometimes you're completely and utterly, no, it's not arrogance. It's not arrogance. It's just like a belief that you could do it. Now, that my belief is well founded, and this is a lesson, an absolute amazing lesson, which I've carried with me for the rest of my life. I said I could do it, not because I believed I could personally do it, because I'd already talked to the existing team who ran the existing airline, and the flight ops director, the chief pilot, the engineer, the head of admin, the head of ticketing, all of whom said, Bill, if you can create a new airline, we'll come to it and we'll run it for you. And they did.
That's an interesting point, because teams are very, very important in business.
Absolutely.
Just going back to your Ford days, I don't know if you're aware, you most probably are, but Henry Ford went bust twice before he started Ford's, which is quite amazing because he made quite a success at Ford's.
Well, he did. He did.
And so, so he had the experience that he'd gained from having two companies that went out of business, which was very important. So please carry on.
The interesting thing about Ford, just you mentioned Ford and the fact that he went bust twice and then he created Ford. One of the interesting things about Ford is that other people tried to replicate Ford by hiring their executives. It didn't work. You could not replicate Ford because there was an inherent culture inside Ford that was the glue, the oil and the glue that kept it together. And this happens in the entrepreneurial world. You've got a successful startup, and then somebody thinks, well, if I hire this person from that startup, my startup is going to be incredibly successful. But sometimes it's not, because, again, the culture is different. And the culture is the oil and the glue, which causes the thing to work. Anyway, going on. So I left KPMG. I went on to British Airways. From a rural farm boy, I ended up being in the top 100 global management team at British Airways. And working on the team that downsized the airline, this is early 80s, downsized the airline from 50-odd thousand down to 42,000, which was an amazing experience. And then I was given one of their operation divisions to run, which was pretty cool. And then they sent me off to Harvard Business School, which was another fascinating experience, the temple of capitalism in the West. And it was really quite an eye-opener and quite an educational experience. And I came out, and British Airways and I lasted for about 6 or 9 months. They hadn't got a proper re-entry plan. I was feeling very uncertain, I think was the word, about where I wanted to go. And we parted company. I wasn't the only one. British Airways wasn't very good at bringing executives that they sent to Harvard and Sloan and places like that back into the company. And in the year I went, 6 of us went and 6 of us left. So it wasn't a terribly good investment, was it, as far as the airline is concerned? But it was a massive investment as far as the individuals were concerned. So I'm eternally grateful.
Did you feel, when you went back to British Airways, did you feel undervalued then, or what was the problem with the re-entry?
That's an interesting question, Robin. It's actually fascinating because there's a three-part answer to that. The first is, did I feel undervalued? I think I was suffering in a way from a degree of imposter syndrome. So I'd skyrocketed, well, not skyrocketed, but I'd had this journey from rural Lancashire to Harvard Business School over a period of not too many years, actually. I think I was in my late 30s at the time. And I'm now rubbing shoulders at Harvard with the great and the good and the captains of industry. And indeed, I was holding my own with them. There's absolutely no doubt about that. In terms of my performance at Harvard, I can say without any doubt that it was incredibly, it was very credible, even in that competition. But when I came back, they didn't value, or they didn't know how to value, the incredible transition somebody goes through. There's a saying when you go off to Harvard Business School, And they'll tell you at the beginning, and this is for people who go later on in life. So you're talking about people in the 30s and the 40s. And you're there for an extended period of time, for many, many months indeed. And they'll tell you at the beginning. So we have a statistic at the end of this course that 75% of you will change your job, change your company, or change your spouse, or all three. And I think you go through a personal transition, and the person that goes back, and in this case, the person, me going back to British Airways, wasn't the person that left.
So you mentioned imposter syndrome, really kind of a big thing for me, imposter syndrome, because I only realised about 3 years ago that I suffered from it badly. And it's really had a big effect on my career. Like you, I got qualified later on in life. In my 30s, I was a bit of a tearaway before then. So to admit, when you've got all the qualifications to back you up, you've been to Harvard, you've been working in very prestigious positions in companies, to have imposter syndrome, I think it's a lot of people, a lot of listeners will have it. They won't realise what it is maybe, or they will realise, and it has an effect on their everyday, and they don't really value themselves, in the way they should. So I've always said, as an aside really, and I might have said this before, even on the few podcasts I've done, if you find someone who doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome, then keep away from them because they're totally nuts. But yeah, I mean, for you to admit and say that, how did that affect you?
I think the interesting thing is that I didn't actually realise at the time that I had imposter syndrome, because nobody put a word to it. Nobody put a title to it or a descriptor to it, and gave it a name. I knew in subsequent years when I started to learn. I actually went off and I got involved in psychotherapy for a while, and initially for my own state of mind and my own good. But then after a little while, I also became so fascinated by it that I wanted to be a psychotherapist. After a couple of years of study, I gave that up as a bad job because I realized that I would probably be an incredibly bad therapist. But I got a lot of good, personally, I learned a lot from it. Although I say that I would have been a very bad therapist, I have to say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because a lot of the knowledge, experience, and skills and what I learned about myself and other people at that particular time over quite a number of years, I find myself applying today. I've applied ever since. So I did get a lot out of it, but I didn't go down the clinical route. I think when I actually realized that this thing called imposter syndrome existed and recognized that I think I probably suffered from it at certain points. And I think particularly when I came back from America, I had to start getting my head around just what it meant. And there's actually nothing wrong with me at all. I'm a valued human being. I have the same value as anybody else. I should be looking inwards at my own strengths and my own confidence. And imposter syndrome comes from, in my humble opinion, comes not from necessarily the experience that you're having at that particular time or recently in my particular case, but it goes all the way back from your childhood and the influencing figures, your parents and the education you went through and the people that you were associating with as a child. And it does a tremendous amount of damage. The people that should never be put in charge of children are teachers and parents.
Yeah, I kind of understand that.
Now, if somebody's got to jump on my head when they listen to this podcast, and I'm being totally aghast at that. And then you have to take it in context, of course, because...
I think particularly, if you're going to take that line, I mean, parents are never trained to be parents.
Exactly.
So you kind of go at it and you don't realise the effect you have on your kids' confidence. I think both my girls, I'm really amazingly proud of them both. But they both suffer from a bit of anxiety and a bit of imposter syndrome. They don't realise how hard they work and how much they deserve what they get. And I'm sure that is down to perhaps things that I've said and done with them. It is a difficult one.
I love your comment about if you find somebody that doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome, then for God's sake, stay away from them, because I guarantee they've got something else that's equally damaging. I think everybody, to an extent, greater or lesser, has an element of it.
Oh, definitely.
But on the odd occasion. But anyway, it was certainly something which has spurred me to learn more about myself and learn more about other people. And I went off and, I guess it also, at this time with British Airways, I decided I'd go and do something completely different. Almost by accident, it was the start of my entrepreneurial career. Because British Airways were not quite sure what to do with me, I didn't have to go into the office very often. Joy upon joys. That it wasn't, the work from home syndrome that you've got today. I was looking at an atlas one day, and I'm thinking to myself, I might go and travel. And I looked at Asia, and I looked at it very closely. And I found that there was a red line that ran from Lahore in Pakistan to Beijing in China. So I decided I was going to drive along it, as you do.
Yeah, quite a normal thing.
Yeah.
I can see that, yeah.
So with that somewhat...
Let's hope it wasn't a fold in the page at this point.
It was not a fold in the page. It was genuinely a red line. So I talked to a couple of friends of mine who were, shall we say, equally adventurous or crazy, and I said, "Look, I can't do this by myself, but I need to. We need to have a team." And in a matter of short order, I had a team of 4 people. Somebody then said, "Why the hell are we doing this? We can't just do this for ourselves. Let's do it as charity. Let's raise some money for young people." And this was a time when there was not a lot of support for young adults. You could be at school until you're 16 or 18, and then by the time you get to mid-20s, you can pick up some kind of retraining or training offering. But the 18 to 23, 24-year-old was very badly served. This is a very long story over dinner. I can go on wax lyrical about this for ages, but cut it short. I founded and funded a charity. It was to help young people, 23 to 24, irrespective of where they came from. Our stock introduction was, we don't care what you've done, we don't care where you come from, we don't care who you are, we don't care about race, ethnicity, or religion. What we're interested in is your future. And we all believe that you've got the power in you to be successful. And we gave each cohort, they went through a selection process, and then we gave each cohort a project. And that project would be an overseas project. They would go and help build houses in Nepal. They would go and build houses in Burundi. They would paint houses in Poland or in Romania. And the first project ever was to drive across China and take a detour down into Nepal and do some charity work in Nepal and do some stuff in China. Within 4 or 5 months, I'd raised sufficient money. I'd got the permissions from China to do it. I managed to acquire some Land Rovers. I'd acquired all the inventory and kit, and we had an operation. It was scuppered by the Chinese because about 4 weeks before we're due to leave, 6 weeks before we're due to leave, they slapped a $70,000 bill on us for support through the journey from along the Karakoram Highway and up through central China up to Beijing, which we didn't have. In today's terms, that's probably $250,000, which we didn't have. But we replanned, and we still ended up in India and Nepal and doing charity work in India. Anyway, that charity ran for 5 years. In the 5 years, I was CEO. So I was the founder and the CEO. I was the chief fundraiser. Again, had an amazing, amazing team and managed to pull people out of all corners of the world to come and help and get the good offices of people like Habitat for Humanity to give us projects and to even get the Royal Commonwealth Society to make introductions in countries overseas where we could do projects. So we put we put 500 kids through the program, young people through the program, and we had a success rate of about 80 to 90%.
That's amazing. So you say it lasted 5 years. What happened?
That lasted 5 years as far as I was concerned. At the end of 5 years, I was burnt out and I needed to go and earn some proper money. But it lasted another decade. So it lasted for 15 years. And it folded after 15 years because there'd been certain changes, strategic changes in direction, which I would not have made had I still been there, which increased the cost base. which was not very sensible when you're reliant on government grants and donations to run an operation. And then after about year 14 or 15, they were very heavily dependent upon local authority and government funding, which dried up. And it was basically wound up. But, in that time, a hell of a lot of people, and even today, all these years later, decades later, I've got people who were on that first year with us who are still in touch with me.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it? So, because, it's quite a long time ago.
It is a long time. That was my entry into in the world of entrepreneurship.
Okay, so you then went up to form other companies. So obviously we're here to talk about the failure, but not just about the failure, but about what you learned from that. So kind of what kind of failures did you come across?
My first three businesses were dramatic failures. They were spectacularly bad. Spectacularly bad for a whole variety of reasons. Very bad research. It was an idea that I was introduced to. So the first idea, I was bringing a product in from the US and asked to set up a direct sales company in the UK for this company in the US, and they provide both expertise and product. And they'd been very successful in the US and brought it over here. And of course, I didn't do my research, did I? It was one of these cases where just because I think that we have the best idea and the most advanced widget that the world would want, it doesn't mean that anybody wants it. And I found that people didn't actually want it. And I ended up with a very large inventory. And the American team, which had been put in, were not, in my mind, not terribly good. And they couldn't adapt to the UK market. They withdrew. So we just wound it up. And then a second one, which was along the same lines, and that failed as well. But the second one, I actually did a little bit more serious work on it. I wrote a really great business plan. In fact, I wrote a fantastic business plan on it. But then I learned that business plans don't equal a business.
Totally see that, yeah.
So moving on, I then got back into tech, because in previous incarnation, particularly through part of the time in British Airways, I'd been involved in exploiting technology, although at a very big corporate scale. I got back again into the space of exploiting technology. And this was the time when SAP and Oracle and Barn and all those people in enterprise resource ERP platforms were all the rage. And I was employed initially as a program manager to run a transformation program, but that morphed into an offer by the company I was with. It was like an intrapreneurship opportunity. He said, look, clearly we think you know something about program management, more than we do. Can you build a program management division? Yeah, okay, we can do that, and did. So I built it in the UK, and then I took it to America, and we started in America with a pile of cardboard boxes and a team of four or five of us in an office in Tarrytown, White Plains, which is north of Manhattan, by about an hour. And we set up building a completely new consulting business from scratch. And again, it was the team that did it. I said I would do it under one condition, that I could choose the people that I took with me. And when I named them, they said, absolutely no way, because those are key people in the UK. And I said, well, if I don't take them, I don't go. So they relented and took them. And we were phenomenally successful. After about 2.5 years, we built it from 5 to about 40 consultants. Big name clients, Harley Davidson. We worked with Siebel. We worked with a company called CHEP. They're at the US end, Diageo. Some solid businesses and a lot of local businesses in the US. And also Raytheon was one of our clients as well. I built quite a substantial practice. And they said, well, now go to Singapore and do the same, because we think Singapore is in a mess. So then I went out to Asia and landed in Singapore. I looked at the Singapore and Malaysia business, and it was a mess. It was hemorrhaging cash. It had a fictitious pipeline, and it had some severe cultural problems. So we've sorted that one out as well. So 2 or 3 years of running that as a business. I think one of the things I learned looking back, and it's fascinating, Robin, because, we're very clever by hindsight, aren't we? We're brilliant. In fact, my hindsight is amazingly good. But I tell you what, where I learned that I could have done much better, and this wasn't just in the Singapore venture, or it was rolling back, even back to my British Airways days. And before that, my KPMG days, although I did, I had a very fortunate and very exciting and interesting career with all of these companies. I wasn't terribly good at politics with a small p. And I think that entrepreneurial people, and I include myself, entrepreneurial people are not necessarily good at politics with a small p. The stuff that we talk about these days, calling it is emotional quotient. We don't understand. We tend. Well, I'm not saying we don't understand. I think when it's explained to us, we do understand, but we don't take account of the necessarily relationships internally within a company or within a group or within a large organization. And we tend to be incredibly focused. And in being focused, we can do some amazing work. We can do some terrific work. But, looking back at the Singapore venture, we got closed down. Having built a very successful business in Asia with clients in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and an emerging client base in China, we had a new group CEO, and he decided he didn't want to play in Asia and closed us down. Now, I often wonder whether if I'd have been more tuned in to what was happening at corporate, could I have avoided that decision? I don't know. In retrospect, I'm thinking about, I wasn't very well connected. Wasn't as well as connected as I should be. I didn't pay attention. I got very focused on sailing the yacht, sailing the ship, on my course, my navigation, and I forgot about the other stuff.
But I've always thought that entrepreneurs generally are very outward facing, generally good with people outside the company, relationship building that side. People that are good with, the politics of a business, the corporate side of it, I call them corporates because they often don't understand. They're kind of quite inflexible. They work within a system. I think the bigger companies I've worked for, there has been politics. And if you get the politics wrong, you don't move up in the company. I think that's a real challenge. And sometimes it's kind of, I think entrepreneurs actually don't suffer from that to start with. But as the companies grow, they have to kind of get over that as a hurdle, which they might not be that good at doing.
I agree with you in the context of the corporate world, but in terms of the entrepreneur, I think where the entrepreneur, and I think you're right, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs are outward facing. But when it comes, and this is, I've done a lot of work around in the last decade in particularly, I've done a lot of work with clients around raising money, early stage companies and my own companies as well, because we hadn't got to those, but we'll come back in a second. But in the context of raising money, there's a tremendous amount of networking and understanding the politics of the funding environment with a small p, and understanding that it is a very, very small community that you have to really get the respect of and massage and take care of. And that's not something, it's kind of another angle on what you described in corporate life, but it's not in big corporate life. It's in the entrepreneurial world, but it's in the world of people who can influence your success or your failure, because you're going to need investment at some point in time. And entrepreneurs are not terribly good at that.
I totally see that. We've spoken about your businesses, and we're going to speak about more of your businesses. You kind of, I would say, almost brushed over the fact that you've had two failures to start with, or three, and we're going to talk about your other businesses. What I want to know is, and I think it's quite important, is how did that failure make you feel? In all your businesses, any business that's failed, how did it make you feel? How did you feel responsible for other people that were associated with the business? Because people, I think, externally look at people that have gone broke or their business has gone bust, and they go, well, very flippant, just, they start another one. And I never saw it like that. I'm sure there's people out there that do that. But emotionally, how did that failure affect you?
I'm going to give you two answers, Robin, because because there's two different scenarios here. And the ones that were talked about, I was running almost what was a franchise operation in the UK, and that failed. It failed because of my inadequacies, and I will admit that. But I accepted the failure and I offloaded the blame on the American company because their team didn't support me well enough. And the one afterwards, which was kind of a run-on, again, it was the model that I adopted from the American company, so it wasn't my fault. Well, of course it was my fault because in retrospect, it was my fault because I didn't do the proper due diligence. I didn't do the proper thinking through. I was very impulsive and enthusiastic, and I was just let's JDFI, just let's go and just get it done. And I took the risk. I think in both of the cases, in those cases, I just kind of go, stuff it. I'll just, I'll move on. I'll do something else. Let me go and find the next, the next thing that will get me out of, not get me out of the mire, will allow me to move on because it's done. I've learned some lessons, but I can't stand still. I can't stand here and just be miserable. And I was miserable. I was in despair and very depressed for a period of time. But I had to shake myself out of that and move on. In one particular case, an executive search guy I spoke to, I thought I'd get a JOB. And he said, there's no chance of you getting a JOB because, you're too old. And I'm trying to think whether I was actually 40 at the time. But anyway, I was too old. And it was impossible that I could earn the money that I was expecting. So my reaction was, "Oh, stuff you then. I'll just prove you wrong." And this little entrepreneur operation, this opportunity I got, I actually got the salary that I was looking for, and I got the role, and I built that role, and I had an incredibly strong and successful career.
It's actually, Bill, quite interesting you should say that. I had a very similar experience after our company went bust. I applied for a non-exec position. Not for a money thing. It was just I wanted to see, it was a bit of imposter syndrome, really, if I could kind of stand on my own 2 feet. And I spoke to someone I know about it who, was into recruitment, stuff like that. And they actually said to me, why would someone want to employ you when you've just gone bust? And actually, the company that I approached, I was interviewed for, not only employed me to be a non-exec, it was kind of 1 day a month, but they said that my experience of going bust made me much more valuable to them because I knew what failure was like. So a bit like your thing, I actually thought, right, sod it, I'm really going to try harder now, make sure that I do something here. There's a lot of parallels I can see there. That's what I'm saying.
So after Singapore, I stayed in Asia. I built another consulting practice, tech consulting practice, out of China and Singapore. And I had a development team as well. And we did some work in Singapore. We did a little bit of work in China, but we also did quite a lot of work in the Gulf, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And that lasted for about a decade. And that was, at the end, it was very successful. Partway through, it was an utter disaster. I had 2 major contracts with big 6-figure numbers on that I'd invested tens of thousands of dollars in one and $150,000 in the other, going through proof of concepts and doing all the stuff to jump through the hoops. And in both cases, for totally bizarre reasons, I wasn't awarded the contract in either. And that was a blow. That was a real gut wrencher. And when you're putting your money up and you've got a team and you're paying salaries and and particularly one very massive contract, which is the one I think it cost me 150,000 in just cash outflow to do the proof of concept. That came out of my pocket, and we got the deal, we got the contract, and we shook hands on it in Hong Kong with a guy it was a US company, and the guy from the US had flown over. We'd gone through the proof of concept. He loved it. We'd shown we could implement it, and he went through top and tail. He'd been with us for quite a long while, looking at what we're doing, and we shook hands on it in Hong Kong. And he said, "Right, and you just need to get the CTO signature on the contract, which I'll do on Tuesday." Which is the American national holiday, Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving, so he was flying back for Thanksgiving. He said, "I'll see him on Monday, sorry, not Tuesday, Monday, and I'll send you the signed contract," which was probably going to be worth initially pretty heavy six figures, but would then run on into about a 5 or 10 million contract. And on the Monday, I didn't hear anything, and I rang him on the Tuesday morning. So I was just about to ring you. I said, "Well, I've got you got it signed?" He said, "No." He said, "Over the weekend, my CTO was fired, and he was the guy that was going to sign it. And his replacement has refused to sign it because he wants to do it a different way with a different group of people." That's one of these gut-wrenching things. Then I felt it was like a definitely SH1T. It was like, what do I do now? Anyway, again, like you said before, you have to climb back. That particular year, our business had quite a significant loss, good six-figure loss. And when you were, in this particular case, I was the sole shareholder. There were some option shares, if anything good had happened in the future, which 2 or 3 of the staff had. But, it's cash out, which went straight out, and it never came back. But then, a year later, it turned around, and we had a phenomenal 2 years before I decided to do something else. And then I started another business, as you do.
You've had a few failures and you've learned from them. Have you got one that was particularly regrettable or that you felt particularly emotional about out of all of them?
Well, can I have some successes as well, please?
You can, but we move on to that. You see,
okay.
It's bust and beyond.
Because it's not all doom and gloom.
I totally understand that.
Doom and gloom. I started a tech company, and it was incredibly visionary. I pride myself as being one of these guys that can, see around corners. And long before Zoom existed, I found a company in New Jersey that had some software which would run video conferencing on conventional laptops and desktops. This was in 2011. Now, at that time, this didn't exist. And if you want to do a video conference in 2010, 2011, you had to spend some serious amount of money with big, heavy-duty equipment and dedicated lines. And the idea that you could do it from a laptop or a desktop was really very revolutionary. And they had proprietary software. And I did a deal with them to set up in Asia an operation which would provide video conferencing on just normal computer equipment, just like we were doing today. But this was in 2011. And we got the software, got the servers. We put servers in Singapore, in Amsterdam, in California, so we could do global. And we set off to sell it. And it was slow. It was very, very slow. And it was something that was genuinely before its time. And because it was before its time, even though I could see its advantages and its potential, not everybody agreed with me. But we were doing kind of okay. And then in May of 2012, Google announced something which became known as Web Real-Time Communication, WebRTC. And I watched a presentation by Google that was done in May, which was basically saying not only can you do video conferencing on a laptop or a desktop, you can actually do it in the browser, which is what Google Meet is today. and what a lot of other video conferencing apps are today. And I look at that and I go, holy shoot, if what they say is right, then what I've got, even though it's advanced and amazing, is going to get blown out of the water, because if you just open a browser and have a video conference, then our infrastructure, which we've built, is going to be obsolete. So I and my co-founder invested a lot of money in building out web real-time communication. We've got a team of techies to actually look under the hood, build a working model, because it didn't really exist at that time, apart from in the Google Labs. Build a working model of video conferencing in a browser using this technology called web real-time communication. And in late 2012, early 2013, on a stage in Atlanta, we demonstrated the first true international, intercontinental web real-time communication video conference over satellite, joining 4 continents. So we did it live on stage in Atlanta. As a result of that, IBM awarded us the accolade of one of the top 3 tech companies to watch. All's good so far. So we're now pivoting into web real-time communication. Late in 2013, mid-2013, I describe it as a hospitalization event. I was actually woke up one day paralyzed. Now, I got through it, but I was actually incapacitated for several months. And when I got back to the company, my CTO and my COO and my co-founder had conspired to oust me. I changed the direction of the company completely. They abandoned the video conferencing proposition based on web real-time communication, was doing some tech-based plugins for video, but nothing that would ever earn it any money or have a wide adoption. And I came back, and the company that I'd created and envisioned had been destroyed, along with several $100,000 worth of my investment. That was one which I was very angry about. Again, there were some amazing lessons there. And, the lessons is sometimes you choose founders for the wrong reason. You choose co-founders for the wrong reason. I chose this particular co-founder for the access to money. But he knew 10% of nothing about the business that we were in. And then while I was away, he relied on the people in the organization to tell him that I was going in completely the wrong direction and they wanted to go and build this. And given the fact that for the past 5 or 6 years, we predated Zoom. We've been using Zoom, we've been using Google Meet, we've been using lots of other video conferencing apps. Even, if you do a video on Facebook, it's on WebRTC. If you do if you do it on Apple, I don't use Apple, but if you do it on iMessenger, you can do a video, that's on WebRTC. So I was right.
I mean, you talk about choosing the right people to work with, founders, co-founders, other people. I mean, on a very simplistic level, said, look, if they don't share your core values, if they don't believe what you believe is right and wrong and everything else, then it is questionable working with them.
That's right, Rob. But sometimes, as an entrepreneur, you are so anxious to get your idea out there that you're not as discerning as you should be about the people you choose to work with.
But I think that's not just entrepreneurs. I think that, if you're working in business and you're overwhelmed and you're bringing a team in, often because of that overwhelm, because of that need to bring someone in properly, you bring the wrong people in. And it's a mistake I made. And they didn't share my core values. So, like simple things like honesty, you'd think that was obvious, but you bring the wrong people in. So I think, I think anyone, as a lesson learned, stepping back and going, right, are these people like me? Are they sharing my values? Do we have that in common at least before you start looking at their skills?
And if they're in, no matter how important they are, if they're in it and you discover that you are uncomfortable with what they do or who they are, for God's sake, get rid of them.
Oh, I totally agree with that one.
You and I can agree today, but then at the time when I first discovered a particular problem that I had, which was one of the guys that ousted me, when I discovered a particular problem that I perceived, well, it wasn't a problem I perceived, it was a real problem, a real character defect. I didn't do anything about it because in my mind, he was critical to the development of the product and getting the tech built and everything else. And I put that ahead of something that I knew was not right.
But that's such a common mistake, isn't it? People think that someone is irreplaceable. And so they put up with them, and no one is irreplaceable. And that's one thing that I've learned over my years in business is that, however important a cog you think someone is, they're replaceable. If their core values don't match you, or they're doing things in a way that makes it very difficult for you, then yes, they've either changed or they go. It's a really important thing. I think that's a good lesson learned. So from your experience then, what would you say, I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but what are the three main things that you've learned that you now would do in a new business that you perhaps got wrong?
Be confident of your own ability. Surround yourself with, this sounds like a cliche, but it's not meant to be a cliche. Surround yourself with people who are better than you are, who are really exceptional people in their own right, both in terms of competence and values, and let them get on with it. Don't micromanage. Your job as an entrepreneur, as the CEO, and you might even be the chair ultimately. Your job is to look ahead at what the business is going to be, not in the bowels fixing the engine, and bring the right people in, guide them, listen to them, involve them, trust them. And if you find that you have a cancer cell, cut it out fast.
I think that's really, really good advice. So we were talking earlier, and you said, let me tell you about some of my success, because I've had success as well. So taking those things, the things that you know that you've learned from the mistakes we all make, but you've made as well, what business did you build that you got all those things right?
Did I get them all right? No, of course I didn't get them all right.
Okay,
I got less wrong
then. So tell us about one of your success stories and what you did and why.
The consulting business that I referred to earlier that I built out of Shenzhen and out of Singapore, and we did the work in the Gulf, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We did have this rather tragic loss of two major contracts, but overall, that was a very, very successful business. And, in the last 3 years, it was a multi-million-dollar business. Our fee revenues were very significant. And we did some seriously good consulting work in really big blue chip companies. So I'm very proud of the team, what the team delivered there and the contracts that we gained. Unfortunately, because of the contracts that were signed, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, were fairly major contracts, and they're still under NDA, so I can't tell you who they are, but they were some very, very significant companies around the Gulf, and also one in Singapore. So the essence of that particular business, which actually I started after our group CEO had closed us down in Singapore, so I ran it for 8 years. And it was a bit of a rocky road sometimes. It went up and went down and meandered a little bit. But its core theme was technology. Its core theme was building and managing big transformation programs. That's what it was. That's what it became. It was very successful. And it came to an end voluntarily because we'd concluded a very big project in Abu Dhabi. And the guys that had been working with me on that project, we all came to the end and go, what are we going to do next? And they go, well, boss, I'm going to take a holiday, a very long one. And that was echoed by a couple of other people. And the other guy said, well, I'm going to go back to New Zealand to my farm. And they left a small core, and I go, I think I'm going to go and do something different too. And I go, I think it's a really good idea. And we just said, it was a good run.
Do you think success killed it then? The fact that everyone was comfortable in their finances and their achievements, that they could just step back and go, I've done it now?
I wouldn't say it killed it. I think it came to a natural point which said, it's time to move on. We're not going out with our tail between our legs. We haven't got a business that has failed. We haven't got a business that's showing deficits. We haven't got a business making losses. We've got a profitable business that's just concluded one of its biggest contracts that it's ever had, and could go on right now to do exactly the same thing in Korea and the same thing in the US. And we go, I don't think so. We'll let somebody else do that. It's hard work.
So looking at that business, what was it about it that made it tick?
It was back to the same thing I mentioned a moment ago, Robin. The successful business that I had in the States, where I took a team of 5 and we started a consultancy business out in New York. This particular business, which ran for 8 years, in every case, and the airline, by the way, the little airline that I started, it was all down to people. It wasn't down to me. I suppose my talent was, and it was a talent which seemed to have escaped me when I actually started to build a video conference company. The talent that I had before then was to choose the right people, put them in the right place, have the vision, be able to communicate that vision, build a coalition of like-minded people around that vision who were in their own rights absolutely competent and complemented each other, and just let it go.
Yeah, no, it sounds spot on. And I think that's some very important skills. And I think one of the things I come across a lot with my clients is they have the wrong people in place and they won't change anything. It's too painful for them to actually make the effort to change anything. And I think as a business owner, entrepreneur, whatever you want to title it, you've got to grab the nettle. You've got to just do it. If someone's wrong, when you work with a fantastic team, and I have done that, everything feels good. Everything feels right about it. When you work with, a bad team, and a good example of this in my industry is if you go on site and there's one bad subcontractor that just doesn't care, the whole site feels down. If everyone's helping each other and it's all kind of working, and it feels completely different. So that's really important.
I think there's something worth adding to your comment about getting the right people around you. There comes a point in time as an entrepreneur, you're going to have a board of directors. And you don't have to have a board of directors that you like. You have to have a board of directors that you need, and you have a board of directors of people that you respect. You don't want a board of directors which is compromised, or it's a group of sycophants and they'll say yes to everything you want to do. Again, in the video conferencing company that I ultimately left, I'm still a very small shareholder, but it's worth 10% of nothing nowadays. My co-founder put a board of directors in, and none of them would say no. None of them would say, you're stupid. No, you're making the wrong decisions. No, you can't do that. They just, everybody applauded how wonderful and far-sighted and everything he was. And he just crashed into the ground. So in the same way as building a company, you have to have the right people in the companies with you and I've just discussed. When it gets to the point in time when you're building the board of directors, you have to be very careful who you appoint.
And on that point, we better leave it. But thank you ever so much for talking to us today, Bill. It's been really, really interesting. And we'll have to catch up over a cup of coffee or a beer sometime and have a real long chat.
That sounds like a wonderful idea.
Okay, thanks a lot, Bill.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I wish you well with the rest of the series of what I'm sure are incredibly interesting podcasts, because there'll be lots of interesting people that you're talking to.
Thank you ever so much, and I will see you soon.
Thanks for listening to Bust and Beyond with Robin Hayhurst. Be sure to tune in next time and visit his website at robinhayhurst.com.